A man followed a trail of blood to his abandoned cabin. What awaited him inside wasn't just a wounded woman. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. Daniel Hoffman had been living alone for a long time. A year ago, he had dug two graves under the snow-covered ground, one big enough for an adult woman, the other small enough for a child. Since that day, he hadn't spoken a single word to anyone, choosing silence instead of speech. Silence had settled over him like a cold shadow sitting in the corner of the room, even while he slept at night. This morning, while darkness still clung to the sky, he was making his way slowly into the depths of the forest. The snow crunched under his boots like thin glass. He had set out to hunt, but hunting was nothing more than a habit now. Hope had long since run out. Two of his traps had been empty, and one had been shut on nothing but a frozen chunk of snow. The only thing he had caught was two rabbits on the verge of freezing to death. The sky was getting lower with thick, gray clouds. Snow looked like it was about to start falling again at any moment. Just as he was thinking of heading back, he noticed a dark red mark cutting through the whiteness of the snow. It was blood, dripping onto the snow, sometimes smeared, partly covered by a thin layer of snow blown by the wind. At first, he thought it might belong to a wounded deer. But next to the trail were human footprints. And these prints were uneven, pressed down heavily, with a slight stagger between steps. Definitely someone injured. The logical voice in his head told him to turn back. This isn't your problem, it said. But another part of Daniel, the part that had stood silently at those graves, still wanting deep down to change something, pushed him forward. The tracks led him to a place he hadn't set foot in for 2 years, an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the forest. He had promised himself never to go there again. He had locked the door, emptied it out, and left it to rot along with the memories. But now, the wind seemed to be pushing him in that direction. When the cabin came into view, Daniel's heart started to beat faster. The door was ajar. That wasn't how he had left it. Using the barrel of his rifle, he slowly pushed the door open. The rusty hinges groaned like a muffled moan. The smell inside was familiar cold wood, dampness, and something else, the metallic scent of blood. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw someone crouched in the corner. She wore a torn dress, with an old blanket, its edges frozen, thrown over her shoulders. Her hair was tangled, her face cracked from windburn. The fabric on her left arm was soaked with dark red stains. When she saw him, she flinched, but then the fear in her eyes turned into tired helplessness. In a faint whisper, almost too quiet to hear, she spoke. "If they find my 4 children, they'll kill them." Her voice was thin, but it carried a heavy weight. Daniel lowered his rifle not because he trusted her, but because he could see she was already surrounded by threats from every side. Slowly, he took off his gloves and approached her. "Are your wounds bad?" he asked. The woman gave a slight nod, but her teeth were chattering. Daniel took the canteen from his belt and handed it to her. She drank like someone who hadn't had water in weeks. The skin on her hands was cracked, her nails broken, her palms covered in sores. Daniel grabbed some wood from the corner and stacked it in the stove. When he struck a match and lit the fire, the crackle of burning wood brought a bit of warmth into the cabin. As the flames grew, the woman spoke in a low voice, without taking her eyes off the fire. "My name's Anna." Daniel filed the name away in his mind. She was young, but she had lived a life that had carved deep lines into her face. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel heard a distant but familiar sound from outside, wolves howling. The woman's eyes widened. "Are you alone?" Daniel asked. Her gaze sharpened for a moment, like glass. "No, I have children. Nearby. I hid them." Daniel exhaled slowly. He knew now this wasn't just a simple story of an injured traveler. This was a brief stop in the middle of a chase, and the hunters were still after them. As the warmth of the fire spread through the cabin, Daniel noticed that the unease in the woman's eyes never faded. Anna kept glancing at the door and the window, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Over the crackle of the fire, the wind began to howl across the cabin's roof. Snow was falling in heavy flakes. Without taking his eyes off her, Daniel spoke. "Where are your children?" Anna didn't answer at first. Her eyelids trembled, and she bit her lip. Then her voice came, almost a whisper, across the stream, among the pines. In a hollow, Daniel took a deep breath. The storm outside was growing stronger. In this kind of weather, the children wouldn't survive long. "We have to go," he said firmly. Anna pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You won't find the way. The snow may have covered the tracks." "I'll find it," Daniel said, picking up his rifle. When he opened the door, the wind hit his face like a knife, cutting his breath short. Snowflakes stung his eyes. Anna stumbled out behind him, trying to keep up with her trembling body under the blanket. They moved away from the cabin, following the tracks. Once they entered the forest, the branches were so heavy with snow that some looked close to breaking. Daniel moved ahead with heavy steps, occasionally raising a hand to signal Anna to stop. At one point, a deep, rhythmic sound came from a distance. It wasn't the howl of wolves. It was the sound of several people moving quickly over snow. Anna's breathing quickened. "It's them," she said, her voice shaking. Daniel turned his rifle toward the darkness. "We get the kids before they get close," he said, quickening his pace. They crossed the frozen surface of the stream and reached the dense pines on the other side. Daniel signaled Anna to be quiet. Among the snowdrifts, at the base of a fallen tree, he saw a hollow partly buried in snow. When he leaned down, a pair of wide, frightened eyes stared back at him. First one face, then the others appeared. For children clung tightly to each other. The oldest, a girl of about 10, stood protectively in front of her siblings. There was a determination on her face far beyond her years. She didn't trust Daniel. Her eyes said, "Come closer, and I'll fight." Anna dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around them. She tried to warm them as she spoke in a whisper, but Daniel couldn't catch her words over the roar of the wind. At that moment, he saw shadows moving between the trees. Black silhouettes, coming closer with slow but deliberate steps. "Hurry," Daniel said in a harsh whisper. Anna picked up the youngest, and the others stood up with effort. Daniel led the way, rifle ready, while the footsteps behind them grew louder and closer. By the time they reached the cabin, the snow was almost up to their waists. Daniel opened the door and ushered them inside. The fire's warmth brought a faint pink to the children's cheeks. But their safety was only as strong as the cabin's lock. Looking out the window, Daniel could see the shadows, still their black shapes against the white snow. They were watching, and Daniel knew that tonight they would try to come closer to the cabin. As the last light of the sun disappeared over the snow-covered forest, the cabin grew darker. The orange glow of the fire cast flickering shadows on the walls. Daniel kept his eyes on the window. The snowstorm would swell from time to time, cutting visibility down to just a few meters. But that didn't mean no one was out there. If anything, the darkness was their favorite cover. The children, exhausted, huddled under blankets in a corner, trying to sleep. But Anna wasn't sleeping. Her hands kept gripping the edge of the blanket, her eyes darting between the door and the window. Her tension only added to the weight already pressing on Daniel's mind. Then, a sound came from far off. At first faint, then clearer, the howling of wolves. But this time, it was different. Closer, much closer. After the howls came the sharp, rhythmic crunch of ice breaking underfoot. Daniel gripped his rifle and moved to the edge of the window. Between the trees, gray shapes were moving. 6, maybe 7 wolves. And they weren't the only threat. From the opposite direction of the wolves came another sound, the heavy, deliberate steps of men walking over snow. 2 groups were closing in at the same time. When Anna saw the look on Daniel's face, she understood. "How many?" she whispered. "At least 4 men. Wolves coming from the other side," Daniel said, his eyes still on the outside. The wind slipping under the door made the fire inside flicker. Daniel placed his second rifle near the door. Then he looked at Anna. "If I go outside, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone, no matter who it is." The wind suddenly shifted. In that moment, the footsteps outside came closer. A voice, sharp and threatening, cut through the roar of the snowstorm from right in front of the cabin. "Inside, give us the woman, and we'll forget the rest." The oldest child, Ruth, pressed closer to her mother, her eyes wide. Anna clenched her teeth and whispered, "They're lying." Daniel took a deep breath. His mind was made up. "Listen to me," he said in a low voice. "If they get inside, stay here in this corner with the kids. Keep the firelight behind you, it'll blind them. Only shoot if you have to." Just then, a low growl came from the other side of the cabin. The wolves were close. One leapt over the snow piled beneath the window, but stopped at the glass, growling. The men outside didn't move from the door. This was the exact scenario Daniel had dreaded, two threats striking at the same time. The voice outside spoke again, harsher now. Last chance, Anderson. Open the door, or everyone in there dies because of you. Daniel raised his rifle, his gaze hard. Come and take her, he said coldly. After that, silence. But it was the kind of silence that cut like a knife through the storm. Then came the soft crunch of snow to the side of the cabin, men taking positions. At the same time, the wolves' growls grew louder. Tonight, both human and animal hunters were after the same prey, and Daniel would have to face them all. The storm was like a giant beast attacking the cabin's roof. The wind howled, battering the window frames, while snowflakes struck the glass like needles. Daniel took position right next to the door, resting his rifle on his shoulder and slowing his breathing. Inside the cabin, the only barrier between the fire's warmth and the deadly cold outside was a few inches of wooden wall. Outside, a single gunshot rang out first. One of the bullets lodged into the log at the corner of the cabin. Splinters scattered across the floor as Anna pulled the children closer. Ruth pulled her siblings under the blankets, her eyes glinting in the dark. Through the narrow gap of the window, Daniel peered into the darkness. Silhouettes moved like ghosts in the snowstorm. 3 men were closing in on the cabin, 2 from the back, one heading straight for the door. At that moment, a wolf's growl came from the left. A gray shadow of a body burst from the trees and lunged at one of the men. The man screamed, tumbling over the snow while the others panicked and pulled back. Daniel didn't waste the opportunity. He squeezed the trigger, the gun's roar drowning out even the storm. A nearby silhouette fell into the snow, arms flailing helplessly. But it didn't stop the others. In fact, it brought a fiercer response. 2 shots were fired at the door, the bullets splintering the wooden planks. Suddenly, a heavy blow struck the side wall of the cabin. It was as if someone was trying to smash through the boards with an axe or the butt of a rifle. Anna turned toward the sound in shock. Daniel barked, "Stay away from there." He quickly moved from under the window to that side. Just then, a hand reached through the small back window, fumbling for the latch. Anna grabbed the spare rifle from the floor and pulled the trigger. With a loud crack, glass and blood scattered onto the floor. The man's scream was swallowed by the storm. But the victory was short-lived. The door latch suddenly dropped, and the door was shoved with full force. Daniel braced his shoulder against it, locked in a struggle of strength with the man outside. As the wind forced its way through the gap, Silas's cold voice came from outside. "Keep resisting, Anderson. Let's see whose breath lasts longer." A wolf's howl cut through the words. The animals, driven by the scent of blood, were more aggressive than ever. Their growls now came from just a couple of steps away from the door. The mix of screams and snarls blended with the roar of the storm. Man and beast were locked in the same hunt for the same prey. Daniel flung the door open in a sudden move and fired. The man in front of him staggered back, but the movement let 2 wolves get right up to the doorstep. Daniel slammed the door shut and dropped the latch. Inside, breathing was quick and shallow. No one spoke, but they could all hear the chaos outside. The heavy crunch of boots in the snow, the short, sharp barks of the wolves, and somewhere in the distance, Silas's mocking laugh. Daniel looked at Anna. Their eyes locked. The truth was clear now before the night ended. Either the attackers would be driven away, or everyone in here would die. The noise outside was now shaking the cabin's walls. The wind blew like a muffled scream between the gunfire and the snarls of wolves. As Daniel reloaded his rifle, his fingers trembled slightly from the mix of cold and adrenaline. Even the warmth of the fire couldn't stop the shaking. Just outside the door, the slow, rhythmic crunch of heavy footsteps echoed. They weren't the frantic steps of men running in panic. This was the sound of someone walking with certainty, slowly, and with defiance. When Daniel aimed the barrel of his rifle toward the door, a dark silhouette dusted with snow appeared through the gap. "Silas," Anna whispered, her voice heavy with both fear and anger. This time, the door wasn't forced. Instead, Silas's voice came cold, sharp, and almost calm. "Daniel, I have an offer for you. Give me the woman and the children, and you'll survive this winter." Daniel answered without a second thought. "This isn't my land, but everyone in here is my responsibility. Your offer's garbage." There was a short silence. Then Silas's mocking laugh slipped in with the wind. "I see," he said, and suddenly a gunshot shattered the window next to the door. Glass shards sparkled in the firelight as snow and smoke swirled inside. Daniel stepped back, raised his rifle, and fired into the darkness just below the broken glass. A figure toppled sideways and vanished into the snow. But that shot didn't stop the others. If anything, it spurred them on. The door began to shake again, this time under multiple heavy shoulder hits. At that moment, a sharp scream came from the back of the cabin. It was Ruth. Daniel spun around. One of the planks under a window had been smashed, and a man's hand was reaching inside. Anna grabbed the hunting rifle from the floor and fired a single shot. The smell of gunpowder filled the cabin. The man's hand yanked back, followed by a curse outside and the heavy thud of a fall. But the real threat was still at the front. The door's latch began to crack under the pounding. Daniel moved toward it with determination. Silas's shadow was clearer now in the dark. His hands appeared empty, but the grip of a pistol was visible at his hip. Daniel decided to open the door but on his own terms. Quietly, he lifted the latch. One hand pushed the door open while the other stayed on the rifle's trigger. The wind rushed inside, snowflakes instantly steaming in the fire's heat. Silas stood 3 steps away. There was no urgency or fear in his eyes. "I knew you'd come out," he said in a low voice. "You don't leave the door ajar for men like you," Daniel replied, never taking his eyes off him. They stayed still for several seconds. Then, in the background, came the growl of wolves and the crunch of his men moving through the snow. Silas tilted his head slightly, smiling without humor. "Last chance." Daniel's reply was short and sharp. "It's over." He fired first. The bullet grazed Silas's shoulder, knocking him back. In that instant, the storm, the gunfire, the wolves' attack, and the darkness all collided. His men stumbled back in chaos as the wolves seized the moment and lunged. Screams echoed through the snow. As Silas slipped into the darkness, Daniel's eyes still searched for his silhouette. This fight wasn't over. The storm didn't let up all night. Snow fell so heavily that within a few hours, half the cabin was buried like a white grave. After a while, the screams and gunfire from outside stopped completely. All that was left was the howl of the wind and, every now and then, the distant echoes of wolves. Daniel was still kneeling by the door, rifle in hand, waiting. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness of the night, but he saw no more movement. This silence didn't mean the attack was over. Sometimes silence was the moment just before the real danger began. Behind him, Anna sat in front of the fire, wrapping the children in blankets. Ruth whispered something like a bedtime story to her siblings, trying to keep their fear at bay. But even she trembled not from the cold, but from the night they had just endured. Daniel slowly stood, lifting the latch from the door. "Where are you going?" Anna asked, her voice a mix of worry and firmness. "I need to make sure it's over," Daniel said, not taking his eyes off her. When he opened the door, the storm had eased. Snow was still falling, but more gently now. The moon peeked through the clouds, casting a pale light over the white blanket of snow. In front of the cabin, 2 men lay sprawled on the ground, one still face down in the snow, the other reduced to a mangled body dragged off by wolves. Blood had frozen where it mixed with the snow. A little farther away, in the shadows of the trees, a piece of Silas's hat flapped in the wind. But he was nowhere to be seen. Daniel followed the tracks. They vanished after only a few meters, erased by the storm's sweeping power. It meant Silas was still out there. When he returned to the cabin, Anna's eyes were fixed on the door. "He wasn't there," Daniel said simply. "He'll come back," Anna whispered. Daniel leaned his rifle against the door and sat down in front of the fire. "Maybe," he said in a calm tone. "But not tonight." One by one, the children drifted off to sleep from exhaustion. Ruth was the last. Before laying her head on her mother's shoulder, she glanced at Daniel, as if to make sure he was staying. The firelight lit the deep lines of weariness on Daniel's face. Quietly, Anna picked up an old, worn wool shawl and placed it over his shoulders. It had belonged to Daniel's wife, whom he'd lost years ago. Seeing it on her filled Daniel with a strange warmth in his chest. After a long silence, Anna spoke without looking away from the fire. "Tonight, you could have walked away. You could have left us." Daniel thought for a moment before giving a short answer. "I couldn't." Outside, the snow kept falling slow but relentless. Within a few hours, the footprints, the bloodstains, and every trace of the fight would be gone. But inside the cabin, 6 hearts beat in the same rhythm. Daniel realized something he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't alone. And no matter how many storms came, this time, he had a reason to stay and fight. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.